Have you ever felt like your doubts were an insurmountable obstacle? That questioning your faith meant losing it forever. What if I told you that doubts aren't the problem, but stopping the search is? C.S. Lewis lived this reality. One of the greatest intellectuals of the 20th century, he didn't just doubt, he completely rejected the idea of God. Yet this resistance led him on an unexpected journey, where his questions were answered so profoundly that he could no longer ignore the truth. In this video, you will discover how C.S. Lewis's conversion teaches us to deal with our own doubts. You'll understand that there's nothing wrong with questioning. What's wrong is giving up the search. Stay with me until the end, because this story may change the way you see your faith. And before we continue, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss powerful reflections like this one. Now, let's begin. To understand C.S. Lewis's conversion, we need to go back to the beginning of his story. How could someone who would later become one of the greatest defenders of the Christian faith spend so many years denying God's very existence? Lewis was born in 1898 in Ireland. From a young age, he was a curious and imaginative child, fascinated by stories and ancient mythologies, but his childhood was also marked by pain. At the age of 9, he lost his mother to cancer. The impact was devastating. His father, unable to cope with the pain, became emotionally distant, leaving Lewis and his brother practically alone. This suffering led to a dangerous thought. If God existed, why did he allow this to happen? The idea of a good God seemed impossible for a boy who saw his world fall apart so early. As a teenager, Lewis was sent to strict boarding schools, where he experienced even more loneliness. It was there that he developed an interest in philosophy and rationalist thinking. He read authors like Schopenhauer and Hume, which reinforced his disbelief. By the age of 15, Lewis made a decision. He was officially an atheist. And then came World War I. Lewis was sent to the front lines, where he witnessed the brutality of war and lost close friends. He emerged from this period even more convinced that the universe was cold, meaningless, and godless. From that point on, he dedicated himself to a life based solely on reason. But deep down, something didn't make sense to him. There was a restlessness that wouldn't leave him alone. And it was this restlessness that would begin to change everything. C.S. Lewis was determined to live as a convinced atheist. To him, religion was nothing more than a comforting myth created by men to cope with the fear of death. Logic was his ally, and faith was something he despised. But no matter how hard he tried to escape from God, the questions pursued him. The great irony, his passion for literature and mythology began to challenge him. He had always been fascinated by epic stories, those that spoke of heroes, sacrifice, and redemption. But why did these stories move him so deeply? If the world was truly meaningless, why did his heart long for something more? The restlessness grew. And then Lewis started encountering people who would shake his certainties. First, he was confronted by the works of G.K. Chesterton, a brilliant and witty Christian who argued that Christianity was not just logical, but the most coherent explanation for reality. Then came conversations with his Oxford colleagues, sharp-minded men like J.R.R. Tolkien, who challenged the idea that faith was mere superstition. And the most disturbing part, these people were not irrational. On the contrary, they were intellectually superior to many atheists he knew. This forced him to admit that his rejection of God wasn't purely rational. There was something emotional about it, almost a prideful resistance. The doubt was no longer about whether God existed or not. It was something deeper. What if I'm wrong? Lewis realized he was facing a dilemma. He could continue resisting and clinging to his atheism, or he could be honest with himself and face the possibility that the truth was completely different from what he had imagined. This crisis was what pushed him toward the greatest transformation of his life. C.S. Lewis fought against the idea of God for years. He wanted the universe to be just matter, a purposeless place where human reason was the only authority. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that his own intelligence pointed to something greater. Truth began to surround him from all sides. He tried to ignore it, but logic betrayed him. If the human mind was just a product of chance, why trust it to discover truth? If right and wrong were just social constructs, why did he care so much about morality? Everything led him to one conclusion: the existence of God made more sense than his absence. Then, in 1929, the inevitable happened. On an ordinary day, without bright lights or mystical revelations, Lewis gave in. He described this moment with an iconic phrase: "On the night of Trinity Term in 1929, I gave in, admitting that God was God, knelt and prayed." Perhaps that night, the most reluctant and dejected convert in all England. It wasn't a moment of ecstasy. There was no immediate joy, no inner peace. On the contrary, he felt like someone who had been captured. He didn't want to believe, but he could no longer deny. But something was still missing. Lewis now accepted the existence of God. He had left atheism behind. Yet, he still didn't believe in Christ. And that would be the next battle he would face. C.S. Lewis now believed in God, but this was not yet Christian faith. To him, Jesus might have been just a great moral teacher, a wise man like many others in history. Accepting Christ as God incarnate was something he still couldn't conceive. Then, something happened. He began to realize that the answers he had been searching for were all found in Christianity itself. The world needed redemption, and different religions spoke about it in various ways. But among them all, Christianity was the only one that made a radical claim. God not only created the world, but he entered it. He became one of us to rescue us. It was then that one of his closest friends, J.R.R. Tolkien, asked him a question that would change everything. Why do you accept that myths carry deep truths, yet reject Christianity, which is the greatest of all myths, except it's true? This idea struck Lewis like lightning. Christianity wasn't just a beautiful story, it was reality. Shortly after, he described the exact moment he finally accepted Christ. It wasn't in a church, nor in a moment of intense prayer. It was during a simple motorcycle ride to the zoo. He wrote, "When I set out, I did not believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. When I reached the zoo, I did." It was a silent but definitive surrender. The last obstacle had fallen. From that day on, Lewis would not only believe, he would dedicate his life to sharing this truth, and the world would never be the same.
C.S. Lewis's journey teaches us something powerful. Doubt is not the problem. The problem is stopping the search. Many people fear doubt, as if it were the enemy of faith. But Lewis shows us the opposite. He didn't just question, he faced his doubts head-on, unafraid of where they would lead. And it was precisely this honest search that guided him to the truth. If Lewis had simply accepted his first conclusions and stopped there, he would never have found answers. But instead, he had the courage to investigate, to challenge his own beliefs, and to follow reason wherever it truly pointed. And that is the challenge I leave for you. What do you do with your doubts? Do you use them as an excuse to walk away, or as motivation to dig deeper? Are you afraid of what you might find if you truly seek the truth? Lewis discovered that Christianity was not just a beautiful story, but the deepest reality there is, and that truth still transforms lives today. So, the big question is, what about you? Will you keep running, or will you allow yourself to be found? C.S. Lewis never planned to become a Christian. In fact, he did everything he could to avoid that path. But the truth cannot be ignored forever. When he finally stopped running, he realized that God had been pursuing him all along. And maybe that's your case too. Have you ever wondered if your doubts are just a smokescreen to avoid facing something greater? Could it be that deep down, God is already calling you, but you're afraid of what that might mean? Lewis discovered that faith wasn't a leap in the dark, but the logical conclusion of his own search for truth. And that same truth is available to you today. So, I ask you, are you ready to stop running? If this video spoke to you, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on C.S. Lewis's journey and how you deal with your own doubts. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now so you don't miss more life-changing reflections. Remember, truth is not something we find, it's something that finds us.